Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday and welcome. Certainly good to be here with you today. In just a little bit, we'll be looking at Numbers chapter 13. I want to talk about an often overlooked character of the Bible, or at least in my opinion, he's overlooked a lot, and that is Caleb. When we think about Old Testament heroes, I don't really see him in the top 5, maybe not even in the top 10 for a lot of people. We think about Moses, Abraham certainly, Joshua, David, and the line goes on and on. But how often do we hear about Caleb? And one of the reasons that I think it would be helpful for us to study him is because we see in him an excellent example of faithfulness. Time and again when the Bible describes what Caleb did that was so special, it's so simple and yet so powerful, he followed God. And I think that your presence here this morning is a sign that you at least want to follow God as well. So why not look to the one who the Bible describes as wholly, completely following God and learn from all that he can teach us. Caleb saw the events of the Exodus firsthand. The Bible tells us he was from the tribe of Judah. He was part of that group coming out of Egyptian captivity. And one of the things that I found interesting as I started to research Caleb and his background, he lived in a time, I believe, of great names. Joshua, his name means Jehovah saves. A little while before, Benjamin, you remember that favorite son beside Joseph? Benjamin's name means son of my right hand. Great, powerful names. Well, I started to look at Caleb, and there's a little bit of a disparity. Some people are confused about what his name might mean, but most agree it's probably a form of the Hebrew word Caleb, which means dog. Isn't that funny? In a time when people have these grandiose names, Jehovah saves, God is salvation, and here's a guy named Dog. But as you think about it, what better description for this one who is held up as a follower of God? If you've ever seen a well-trained dog who's been treated well and had the opportunity to learn, he is the picture of faithfulness, the picture of one who is ready to help, to be useful, to follow, and to learn. And that's certainly what we see from the life of Caleb. He is probably most well known for spying out the land and encouraging Israel, the land of promise. And that's where we're really going to focus. So first let's talk about Caleb, and then we'll talk about application for us. In Numbers 13, the first 2 verses of that chapter, we see the introduction. This is the land of Canaan. Now the Israelites have come out of Egyptian bondage. It's time to go see the land God has promised. Numbers 13, verses 1 and 2, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. Now time and again when we read through the Old Testament, we read about the 12 tribes of Israel. And up until the time of the kingdom of Israel, where they have King Saul, they're always dealt with on these terms, and even some after as well. But a man is chosen from each of the 12 tribes, and as we mentioned, Caleb is from the tribe of Judah. And he's selected to be one of these 12 scouts to go and spy out the land. Further down in chapter 13, look in verse 21. Numbers 13, beginning in verse 21, So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin. Now describing their entrance a little further down, it says, Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between 2 of them on a pole. And they also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. And then finally in verse 25 it says, They returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now I don't know about you, but when I read those, there's a definite image that comes to my mind from these verses. And maybe it was something I saw in Bible class when I was younger. I can't quite remember. But just the picture of a massive lump of purple grapes. And I'm sure there was some artistic license taken here, but grapes the size of pumpkins, and a huge cluster of them hanging on this pole as described there. And this is a picture of a rich land. The term that's going to be used from here on out is a land flowing with milk and honey. And the idea is, this is God's bounty. This is God's blessing, giving them an abundant wealth to have in this land of promise, the land of Canaan. So after these 12 spies spend their time scouting the land, they have to come give report. And you notice it's not just an oral report, It's show and tell, because they've brought these massive grapes, the pomegranates, the figs, the wealth of the land. Look in verse 27. Numbers chapter 13, down in verse 27. They're giving their report to Moses and all of Israel. It says, "Then they told him and said, 'We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. Their cities are fortified and very large.'" And talk goes on like this for a little bit, but then Caleb stops them. The Bible says, "Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it.'" Now I want to remind you first where this promise comes from. We've heard described several times already the land that God has promised. You remember Abraham, and another name, by the way, the father of many nations. And as God spoke with Abraham, he talked about his descendants being blessed, even to the extent that God would bless everyone who blesses them and curse everyone who curses them. But part of that promise to Abraham was a land that God would give to his descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of bounty and abundance. And so this is something that is rooted not only in this generation, but in past generations and past generations and past generations, back through the line of patriarchs back to Abraham. And so when Caleb stands up, he's standing up with a lot of history on his side. And now I want you to notice the way the Bible describes it. He quieted the people. There's a lot of clamor going on. There's a lot of discussion about these mighty men in the land, about their fortified cities. But Caleb says, let's stop all that talk. He quiets them, and he says, we are well able to possess it. Let us go up. And as he says those words, he's calling back on all that history, calling back on the promise of God. It's been delivered. The Bible tells us that Joshua, another of the 12 spies, stands with Caleb. The two of them give their report, and they say, let's go. But you know the report from the other 10 was not as promising. Look in verse 31. Numbers 13:31. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And in the last part of verse 33, they said, we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Look at the huge difference in attitudes here. Caleb, along with Joshua, stands up and says, we are well able to take this land. The other 10 say flatly, we're not able. It cannot happen. This is an impossibility in their mind. And I want you to notice the words they use. We're not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And I want to tell you this morning, that statement that they make, I believe, is absolutely true. The inhabitants of the land were stronger than the Israelites. But the difference was, Caleb and Joshua said, the inhabitants of the land are not stronger than God. There's a big difference between relying on God and relying on your own strength. But why is it that these leaders from the 12 tribes who were selected to go scout out the land, all saw the land, all saw the cities, all saw the cluster of grapes, the pomegranates and figs, all saw everything that God had promised them? Why were the reports so different? They were all following God. They all took part in the Exodus, coming out, seeing the blessings that God would give to His people. The difference is Caleb and Joshua followed God more fully. And as we think about the Bible describing this point, we know that God takes that faithfulness seriously. In fact, it was because of this bad report that God would punish Israel. And He says that entire generation would die wandering in the wilderness, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua. In Numbers 14 and verse 38, Numbers chapter 14, 38, it says, but Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. They were the exception. And the Bible even gives us particulars about why they were exceptional, why they were held separate, using that terminology. Earlier in chapter 14 and verse 24, the inspired text says, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. And there was a similar promise given to Joshua for His faithfulness. But I want you to notice there's a difference that the Bible makes between one who follows God and one who follows God fully. And as we seek to follow God today, we need to make sure that we're part of that second group. Not just to say I'm a follower of God, not just to make an attempt, but to go for it fully, to fully follow the Lord. And this isn't the only place that we see this terminology applied to Caleb. In fact, later in the Old Testament, if you look in Numbers chapter 32, there in verses 11 and 12, it says, "Surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and above shall see the land." And describing why, he says, "Because they have not wholly followed me, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun." And we have a very similar verse, repetition for emphasis, in the book of Deuteronomy. In chapter 1, verses 35 and 36, "Surely none of these men of this evil generation shall see that good land," but again, "except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he shall see it." The Bible says, "because he wholly followed the Lord." So you get the idea that this is something special, that this is something unique, and beyond that, it's something that you and I need to try and put into practice, to emulate in our own lives, to learn from Caleb's mighty example. So as we think about what it means to follow God and to follow God fully, I provided for us three ideas or three points that we can use. First, we need to follow God wholeheartedly. And this is the most basic idea that we can draw because the word that the Bible used was wholly or fully. And so, of course, if we're seeking to follow God, we're not going to do it halfway. We're going to do it with all of our heart. And this is true to one of the core teachings of the Bible. In Matthew 22 and verse 36, we have an occasion where someone has approached Jesus and basically said, "What's it all about? What's the highest commandment? What's the core belief that I need to have as a follower of God?" Matthew 22:36, he says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And you know the answer. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." Now you remember one thing that we noticed in Numbers, the difference between Caleb and Joshua and the other spies. One was relying on self, said the people in the land are mightier than we. But Caleb said the people in the land are not mightier than God. God has promised this. We are well able to take it. That's the mark of someone who loves the Lord with all his heart, who trusts in the promises of God, who is ready to do his part in taking action to attain the promises that God has given, the blessings that are ready for his faithful. Those who love the Lord a little bit don't have that measure of faith. Those who love the Lord part way, half-heartedly, they fall back into fear. This division within the Spirit is described in the Bible as being one of the most dangerous things we can fall into. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, Jesus taught on this principle. Matthew 6:24, he says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." The word mammon meaning money, and has with it even more than that the idea of avarice and greed, to seek money. You can't seek God and his kingdom and at the same time seek wealth and self, your own selfish gain. And when we see someone who is divided in this way, they're not able to follow God. But nevertheless, we have a lot of people who are trying to do that. Just exactly that. In this world today, they say, "I'm going to serve God, I'm going to do whatever he requires, and then the rest, that's for me." Well, guess what? When you do what God requires, there's nothing left over. There's not the rest for you to apply to your own selfishness. No, it is all given to God. We have a warning in the Old Testament, in the book of Proverbs. We're talking about following God wholeheartedly. Well, it is key to focus on the heart. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23 says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life." There's not a clear-cut separation between what's in your heart and what's in your actions. And people who try and live that way find themselves in chaos because of it, because they're fighting against their true nature. What's in our heart, where our love is, that's where our actions are going to be toward. And that's going to be evidenced by the behavior that we undertake. And so if we keep our heart aligned with God, then our actions, our behavior will also be aligned with God. And as we saw earlier, this is the first commandment, to love God with everything, with all of our heart. And if we seek to learn from Caleb's example to follow God rightly, we will follow him wholeheartedly. Now, number two, as we get deeper into this idea, we need to follow God persistently. When we think about persistence, the idea of that word is to overcome trials, to overcome opposing forces. If you are persistent, you don't let any of that stop you. Think about what kind of persistence Caleb showed. When they went to scout out the land, what did they see? Two main categories. They saw it was a rich land. You remember that giant fruit. You remember flowing with milk and honey. But they also saw strong people and strong cities. Caleb didn't let that discourage him. Caleb didn't let that draw his heart away. He said, I'm going to follow God in spite of these inhabitants of the land. And going further, he didn't let the other 10 spies stop him. The Israelites who were discouraged, the ones who said, we're not able to take it. He was persistent through that and said, no, we will. This is the promise of God. In Matthew chapter 26, we read about Simon Peter and some of the issues that he had in following God. And we don't notice these to look at a weakness in Peter. We notice these to look at a weakness in humanity. Because I think in his place, a lot of us would find ourselves in exactly the same situation. The first scene from verse 35 of Matthew 26, we find at the Last Supper, Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, and beyond that, all of you are going to be scattered. Every one of you is going to deny me. And there in verse 35, Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. He says, I'm a follower, and I am a true follower. I'm going to follow you fully. I'm going to be persistent through every trial, even if it means my life. But just a few verses ahead, in verse 69, after Jesus is taken away, Peter sat outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. And you can just paraphrase that statement to mean you're a follower of Jesus. But Peter denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you're saying. And I want you to notice this sharp contrast. The first scene, even if I have to die, I'm going to follow you. The second scene, no. I don't know what you're talking about. That's not me. I'm not a follower. And as we said, it's not a weakness unique to Peter. It's a weakness unique to humanity. When we're gathered around with like-minded Christians, when we're in situations where temptation maybe isn't as large, rearing its ugly head, we are strong followers of God. But in times of trial, in times where maybe there's not so many faithful Christians around, that's when it's difficult to be a follower. That's when we have to persist through that trial. That's when we have to overcome. And a lot of times we fall short in following God fully. We only follow Him until it gets hard. In Matthew chapter 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount, beginning in verse 10, Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. One of the things that I think would be helpful to keep in mind, that when we're going through trials, when we're being tempted, when we're being persecuted, when we have enemies opposing us, we're in good company. There has not been a follower of God, one, who hasn't faced trials. That's one of the promises handed down in Scripture. Those who live godly shall suffer persecution. And so be mindful of the prophets of old. Be mindful of preachers of righteousness down through the ages. Be mindful of our King, Jesus Christ. He faced hardship. He faced trials. He had enemies opposing Him and what He was trying to do. And so, of course, if we're following God, going in that right way, we're going to find the same. One thing that might be helpful to us is to use these as markers, as checkpoints along the way. If you're living your Christian life and suddenly you've come up against a hardship, you hit a wall, stop and say, this is here for a reason. This is here because I'm seeking to do God's will. This is here because I'm trying to be a true follower of His. And then draw strength from God, from the brethren, and overcome that. Be persistent as you follow the Lord. Now third, and maybe most importantly, looking at Caleb's example, we need to follow God constantly. It will do no good to follow wholeheartedly and persistently if we have a deadline. If we say, I'm only going to follow up to a certain point and then I'm done and I'm going to do something else. We have to follow God constantly. In the book of Joshua in chapter 14, we get to see another picture of Caleb's life. Now this is after that wicked generation has perished in the wilderness. They're coming to claim the land. And in Joshua 14 and verse 8, we get to see Caleb himself describe what's going on here. He says, I wholly followed the Lord my God. So we see that again, that hallmark of Caleb's attributes, that he's going to follow God fully or wholly. And he says, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness, and now here I am this day, 85 years old. He's looking back on his past life, looking back 45 years back to the time when they went to spy out the land. And he says, God has been true to me all this time. And I think there's an important point for us to grasp here. Think about what's been going on in these 45 years. The large majority of it was wilderness wandering. The large majority of it was Israel roaming around, complaining against God and being punished by Him for their unfaithfulness, and then time again coming back and falling back into that, and coming back and falling back into that. All this time being outside the land of promise because they didn't all have the faith of Joshua and Caleb. And all the time through this, Caleb says, I've been blessed. All the time through this, he says, God has been with me. We need to realize that just because we may be facing physical hardship in this life doesn't mean there's not spiritual blessing coming at exactly the same time. As Caleb went through this time and wandering and being with Israel as they're trying to come back to God and raise a godly generation who will come and take the land, he says, I've been with God constantly, and it's been a glorious thing. And that's maybe part of the key to this idea of following God. If you're following Him rightly and fully, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in the wilderness. It doesn't matter if you're in the land of promise. It doesn't matter if you're surrounded by enemies or friends. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. You're with God. And that's what matters. To follow God is always key. In the New Testament, in Romans chapter 12, a well-known verse, Romans 12 and verse 1 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now the reason we bring this verse out is because a sacrifice is not given temporarily. There's a lot said in the Old Testament through the book of Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy about Old Testament worship and about sacrifices that were offered by the priests. There wasn't a sacrifice one where it was sacrificed and then later it got to go back to being a goat or a bull out in the field. When they are given, they're given. And the same is true for us. As followers of God, we follow God constantly or not at all. Looking at faithfulness, it has to be complete. It has to be lasting. And so we present ourselves a living sacrifice. And you notice the Bible says this is our reasonable service. In Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, there's a lot said about persecution, about trials that would happen down through your lifetime. And there in at the end of verse 10 it says, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. If you wanted to find some sort of deadline, when can I stop following God, or when does God say I've done enough? This is it. Be faithful until death, until the end of your life. So the entirety of your life given to God. Following Him constantly. And just like Caleb, we can look back and say, down through all these years, whether I had a good day or a bad day, whether I was being in the lap of luxury or whether I was suffering, God was blessing me. And I can see the blessings of God down through the years, down through the ages of my lifetime, and I'm thankful for it. Following God constantly, faithful until death. Now thinking about us today and looking at Caleb's example, the question is, are we willing to learn from that? Will we follow God in a scriptural way, in a biblical way, like we see heroes of faith doing, like we see Caleb doing? Will we follow God wholeheartedly? Not doing anything halfway, not trying to save a portion for ourselves, but to say all is given to God, totally devoted? Are we willing to follow God persistently in the face of trial, in the face of hardship, to overcome any enemy or opposition, not because of our strength, but because of the strength of our God? And finally, are we willing to follow Him constantly, without ceasing, without retiring, without quitting and backing off, but to go all the way with God? There is a call that is issued from the New Testament, and it comes from Jesus Himself. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, Jesus says, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." Some people say, I would obey God if Jesus showed up at my door and told me what I needed to do. Well, if you're in need of a personal invitation, I think the Bible's provided that in more ways than one and in more places than this. But certainly we can look to the Scripture here and find our Lord Jesus saying, you need to come after me. You need to be a follower. And with everything that the Bible teaches on this point and all that we've looked at this morning, we know just how serious a thing that is. To give yourself entirely to God, to follow the Lord fully, as Caleb did. If you're not yet a Christian this morning, that opportunity is certainly available to you. The opportunity to have your sins washed in the blood of Christ, in the waters of baptism, to rise as a new creature, ready to serve Him for the entirety of your life. And if you are a Christian, maybe you've slipped as you're trying to follow God. Maybe you've fallen back. Maybe you've gone in your own way. The Lord is ready to forgive you of that, and we're ready to work with you. If there's any way that we can assist, we would invite you to come as together we stand and sing.